New provocations tonight from two countries that Trump officials have warned, Iran and China. Fox News has learned that Iran fired 5 advanced surface-to-air missiles yesterday. That development comes less than a week after the White House put Iran on notice for conducting new ballistic missile tests. And China defying the Trump administration, sailing 3 of its Coast Guard ships near contested islands that it claims in the East China Sea. Our special guest tonight, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway. Also tonight, we await the fate of President Trump's executive order calling for extreme vetting of immigrants and refugees. The left-wing Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals deciding whether to reinstate the order, which President Trump says is required to keep America safe.
We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in, not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country.
Judge Andrew Napolitano joins me to discuss the legal arguments and likely conclusion of the court. And President Trump acknowledges that repeal and replacement of Obamacare may not happen this year.
We're going to be putting it in fairly soon. I think that, yes, I would like to say by the end of the year, at least the rudiments, but we should have something within the year and the following year.
Ed Rollins, Michael Goodwin take up the Trump agenda and the Dems' efforts to block the president at every turn. Good evening, everybody. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has just scheduled oral arguments on President Trump's extreme vetting executive order for tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. President Trump today detailed his rationale for that order while addressing troops at the U.S. Central Command headquarters in Tampa, Florida.
We're up against an enemy that celebrates death and totally worships destruction. You've seen that. ISIS is on a campaign of genocide, committing atrocities across the world. Radical Islamic terrorists are determined to strike our homeland.
Mr. Trump's Justice Department this evening filed a brief with the Ninth Circuit attempting to lift the temporary restraining order against the extreme vetting program. The White House arguing the president acted within his constitutional and statutory powers, that the Constitution gives him broad authority over national security that includes who is let into this country and when. The White House also arguing the immigration ban is only temporary for purposes of national security, not a permanent measure, and stipulating that the executive order does not extend to lawful permanent residents, that is, LPRs or green card holders. Silicon Valley continuing its efforts to undermine the Trump administration despite national security concerns. Nearly 100 tech companies and their CEOs, including Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, to just name some of them, have filed an amicus brief against the president's executive order. Mr. Trump making his position clear on the Washington state judge that struck down the extreme vetting order. The president tweeted this: "Just cannot believe a judge would put our country in such peril. If something happens, blame him and the court system, people pouring in bad. I have instructed Homeland Security to check people coming into our country very carefully. The courts are making the job very difficult." Joining me now to discuss the legal showdown over the president's executive order, the White House investigation into recent leaks on phone calls with foreign leaders, and Iran's firing of 5 missiles yesterday, defying the White House warning that Iran is on notice, and so much more. Kellyanne Conway, White House counselor to President Trump. Kellyanne, good to have you with us, and we appreciate your time. Let's start with the oral arguments tomorrow. The brief filed by the Solicitor General, the Attorney General, at least the representatives of those two offices today, straightforward. The president has the constitutional power, the statutory authority to do exactly what he did.
That's right. And the judge in Seattle seems to have issued a very broad nationwide injunction. We're not even sure that the litigants here have standing. States don't have standing. Individuals would have standing. And an individual would have to show standing and also harm. So we think this is overbroad. It's a nationwide injunction. We also take, people aren't really talking much about the Boston judge, Lou, who found the exact opposite in his ruling this weekend, where he said that he was not going to put a temporary restraining order on the executive order. And so we are confident that we will prevail on the merits. We know the Ninth Circuit is tough, but as you say, presidents have very broad authority, but they also have a duty and a responsibility to keep their nation safe, and that's what President Trump is trying to effectuate here.
And referring to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the most overturned, it's a far left court by any standard. It is, I would guess, your idea, your expectation that you'll be moving forward to the Supreme Court with this case.
Well, that could be. We have to see what their ruling is. I certainly don't want to guess there or project on that, but we're prepared to see this through to its natural result. And as I say, the president is confident that we will prevail on the merits, and he's very confident that he's given his constitutional and statutory authority to protect the homeland. I would point out to your viewers too, Lou, you may have been getting to it, but there was an AP story today that really caught my attention by Eric Tucker. He went and he fact-checked this judge in Seattle, Judge Robart, who claimed from the bench that the answer is zero foreign nationals from these 7 countries had been arrested since 9/11. That is just false. And I know the media is so into fact-checking immediately, and they should really look at this article because the judge said something. This is the judge, and he said something that's just not true. There have been foreign nationals that have been arrested, and I want everybody to look at that because it's a very important piece that's probably not getting much coverage.
Well, and thank you for doing so. This district court judge in Western Washington put himself in the position of being rather a person with broad views, as you suggest, that it ended up in his order. Secondly, that he had better information than the President of the United States. And on its face, his order, if I may say, it makes him look rather silly. I don't think he will get too excited if I suggest that he is somewhat liberal and somewhat over his skis in terms of what he presumed to be able to order from his bench in the Western Washington State District. Let's turn, if we may, to Obamacare and its repeal and its replacement. The president acknowledging to Bill O'Reilly that perhaps not this year. Today we learned that the Speaker of the House thinks perhaps still by the end of spring there could be some kind of replacement. What's going on here?
I can tell you that the repeal and replacement of Obamacare is an item that has been very much in the president and before that President-elect's focus. Many meetings. We're waiting for our Secretary of HHS, Dr. Tom Price, Congressman Tom Price, to be confirmed. That would be nice, so we can really get going here. But, you know, the Republicans have come up with 3, 4, as many as 9 plans over time. So we do feel like there are many good elements that exist, Lou, that are going to allow Americans to buy health care across state lines and increase the number of health savings accounts, maybe block grant Medicaid to the states. There are many different things that will happen. But Obamacare has been around for almost 7 years. It was March of 2010. So the roots and the tentacles go very deep here. And they really need to be, I think, extracted. And we also want to make good on the president's promise that people who are relying upon it will not go without coverage during the transition process. Many moving parts here. Donald Trump keeps his promises. I think you've seen that in the first 2 weeks. Right. He's going to continue to do that, and repealing and replacing Obamacare is a big piece of that. And, you know, we need to work with Congress on the timeline as well, but we are. You
know, as you say, the tentacles do run deep over the course of that time, but at the same time, the House of Representatives has repealed it variously 60-plus times. Obamacare, right. One could be forgiven for thinking that the House leadership would have had a replacement proposition in mind and ready and waiting for a presidential candidate who won office, promising to keep some of that plan. It's going to be, what is your assessment right now? Will it be this year, next year?
Well, it could be this year. It could be. But the president said it could go into, you know, the rudiments are there, and we just can't predict the timeline only because there's so many different moving parts. But I do assure you of one thing. The urgency and the action on this particular issue will not let up. This is one that is not just check the box and put over there, and we'll get to that sometime later before re-election. This is a very serious centerpiece of President Trump's agenda, and he will make good on that promise to repeal and replace it. You know, but he also has taken into account the Council of Healthcare Professionals, of his advisors, looking very forward to talking to Secretary of HHS Tom Price and his advisors, his team. Certainly has been talking to Leader McConnell, Speaker Ryan, many different people there. Seema Varna, who's the new head of the Medicare and Medicaid, she's been involved also. So there are many different moving parts here, but I'm very confident that the issue that I believe helped Republicans win in 2010, 2014, and 2016, really 3 of the 4 elections since President Obama won in 2008, Obamacare, it's going to change in this country, and the way that we access and we receive our health insurance will change fundamentally. Much more patient-centric, much more less government-focused, much more free market.
And the leaks from the White House and the telephone calls with 2 of the foreign leaders with whom the president spoke, under investigation. What is your expectation? And if you will, give us a sense of where you are right now with that investigation.
Well, when they're characterized as, quote, leaks from the White House, it may be a bit misleading that people think that's where it came from. There are different parties that would have had privy to that information, and so I will let the investigation continue without me projecting what its findings will be, but I will tell you, I will repeat that the president has been very negative about any leaks, has really pushed back upon them in no uncertain terms, as well he should. He needs to have private conversations with these leaders. He has said that there was a complete mischaracterization of the tone and the content of those calls, but he also at the same time will put America first, whether it's in these phone calls or in these upcoming meetings with foreign leaders, many of which are getting scheduled right now, Lou. That pace will really pick up soon. But I don't think that the leaks came from certain people because they would have been unflattering, and they certainly didn't come from the White House. But there are other people who are privy to that information, and then I think also want to put some of their own flourish on the calls that ends up being an inaccurate reporting of what happened. Inaccurate
reporting. Hard to imagine, but there it is. Kellyanne Conway, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou. We appreciate the platform. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. Breaking news now on Iran. 2 U.S. officials tell Fox News Iran fired off 5 advanced surface-to-air missiles as part of a military exercise yesterday. The Iranian missiles were launched from a remote area 45 miles south of Semnan, Iran, the location of last week's ballistic missile launch. These surface-to-air missiles are used to down aircraft. Incoming ballistic missiles, officials say the tests were successful. And there are new details tonight involving 3 Chinese cutters sailing near the disputed Senkaku Islands today. U.S. officials telling Fox News the boats are Coast Guard cutter ships inside Japanese waters in the East China Sea, about 140 miles northeast of Japan. The 4,000-ton cutter is 350 feet long. It has a single deck gun, small arms aboard, but otherwise no armament. This latest provocation comes just 2 days after Defense Secretary James Mattis in Japan vowed to defend the island, saying China has shredded the trust, as you just heard, of nations in the region. Joining me now to discuss all this is Fred Fleitz. He's Senior Vice President for Policy and Programs at the Center for Security Policy, and it's good to have you here.
Good to be here, Lou.
Was that a reach too far on the part of the Defense Secretary to be as bold as he was in telling the Chinese what would be tolerated by President Trump?
I don't think so, Lou. What we're seeing here is America's adversaries are testing us after 8 years of appeasement and leading from behind. And there's this narrative that the media and Democrats are circulating that Donald Trump is somehow creating new instability. No, this instability was already there and growing worse. Mattis is standing up to it.
Yeah, that's such nonsense by the national left-wing media, and by the way, by their corporate bastards as well, who've unleashed them. Let's listen to the new Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, in his hearing and how he responded to this very issue. If we could please roll that video.
The island building in the South China Sea itself, in many respects, in my view, building islands and then putting military assets on those islands is akin to Russia's taking of Crimea. We're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, and second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed.
Let me be clear. I'm for a modest foreign policy. I believe we've been far too adventurous as a nation over the course of the past quite some time, maybe 30 years. But Tillerson is laying down a marker, clear, vivid, and you don't think the administration may be going too far in the person of Tillerson and Mattis when the response by this administration is nothing. How do you differentiate no response from appeasement?
We have to call out these provocations, especially with Iran. Iran is threatening the freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf. Yes.
Calling things out is something we heard from the Obama administration for years. He was a talker. This is a president who is a doer. This is a president who said he's about action, not talk. And the last thing the American people want to hear are the dour notes of another call out.
Well, I think that's right. First, you call them out. If they don't listen, it's going to have to be backed up with force. And it wouldn't surprise me if force has to be used to guarantee the freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. I can see that coming. I think that is the type of challenge we may see from Iran that we may have to use military force to stop. And
the islands there?
I think that's a different situation. China frequently engages in military activities concerning these islands. This particular incident isn't unique. There have been other incidents with fighter jets.
Would it not be better to just be quiet then? If you're going to do nothing, why would you say something? Because we learned in Syria and everywhere else that President Obama gestured that it was meaningless.
Because China and Russia and Iran respect strength. And I think a strong United States...
You don't surely equate verbal signals with strength.
I think you start with verbal signals. Yeah. Then we start
with quiet, non-verbal, at least public signals, and use diplomatic channels the way in which they were intended to be used to say this will not go any farther. This is where it is, because this is not a public that is exactly energized by the idea of more bellicose verbiage emanating from a White House.
I think we have to call out these threats. For too long, we've ignored them. We've played along with them. But yes, there has to be diplomacy behind the scenes. There has to be a larger U.S. naval presence in the South China Sea. I think that's going to bring more stability to the region.
And let's turn very quickly, if we may, to the Circuit Court of Appeals, the hearings on stopping, for at least temporarily, a ban on those coming in from 7 nations, predominantly, all of them Muslim, majority Muslim, for extreme vetting. Your reaction to what the threat is to national security as a result of the intervention of the judiciary?
Well, first of all, I think this is a significant threat. This is the same list of terrorist states that the Obama administration had identified, and I think the reasoning that this judge gave to stop the travel ban had no legal justification.
All right. Fred Fleitz, always good to talk with you. Great to see you.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much. Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. Are you concerned that technology, Wall Street, media, and entertainment conglomerates and CEOs have all launched an unprecedented, furious assault against President Trump? An extraordinary response by the establishment. Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. We'd like to hear from you. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And on Wall Street today, stocks moving, well, a little lower. The Dow lost 19 points, the S&P down 5, the NASDAQ down 3. Volume on the big board, 3.1 billion shares. By the way, if you're looking at various business news sources, you might have noticed the market watchers quick to blame some concerns about President Trump's policies for these slight moves to the downside, citing political uncertainty, as if in 2 weeks they were expecting something more than what he's already accomplished. The market, by the way, just to put it all in context, has gained $2.1 trillion since Election Day. I wonder what caused that. Not uncertainty about this president's policies, that's for sure. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Up next, members of the Obama administration have gone Well, way past trying to undermine President Trump. They're outright trying to destroy a presidency, it seems. That's the subject of my commentary here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A few thoughts now on the forces at work against President Trump, his administration, and his anti-establishment populist agenda. President Trump won the presidency with his populist campaign against the establishment, against the elites. While he was underestimated as a candidate, however, the establishment is lashing out now against President Trump from every quarter almost daily. The president accuses holdover, quote, Obama people of being responsible for leaks to the press about his White House calls with foreign leaders, saying, quote, it's a disgrace they leaked because it's very much against our country. It's a very dangerous thing for this country. The sources of those leaks may indeed be former Obama officials, perhaps someone else, but they are clearly pro-establishment and anti-Trump. That narrows the suspects down to, well, just government or business or political or academia suspects. All the establishment forces that are arrayed against our populist president and the tens of millions of Americans who voted for him. Lugubrious leftists, including John Kerry, Susan Rice, Janet Napolitano, adding their names to a joint declaration with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals against the president's extreme vetting order. The former Obama administration officials who claim the Trump order, quote, undermines our national security, joining nearly 100 technology companies in support of that lawsuit. Of course, George Soros donating to several individuals and organizations behind those lawsuits, including the ACLU, the National Immigration Law Center, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. The leftist establishment, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, talking about leftists, and the corporate masters of the left-wing media have given license to attack the president mercilessly and constantly. And while President Trump is besieged by the establishment he is working hard to bring down, what can he do to bring more allies to the fight? Because it seems right now his allies on Capitol Hill have been for far too long aligned with the petrified establishment and entitled elites of both parties. They serve only their masters, the special interests, who've created the mess that Mr. Trump and his band of renegades are trying to sort out and to ultimately fix, to ultimately win for the American people a decisive victory against the very forces that have diminished our middle class, the establishment that has denied to millions of Americans a better life in favor of foreign cheap labor and historically high profits. Now, our quotation of the evening, if I may, this one from General Douglas MacArthur, who said, I am concerned for the security of our great nation, not so much because of any threat from without, but because of the insidious forces working from within. Indeed, they are, and working overtime. We're coming right back. President Trump defending his extreme vetting executive order to protect all Americans.
The executive order establishes a process to develop new vetting and mechanisms to ensure those coming into America love and support our people, that they have good intentions.
We'll take up the legal challenges and presidential authority with Judge Andrew Napolitano here next. Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein promising President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch, promising a fair and neutral confirmation hearing.
I want the Democratic side to start out from a neutral base and really do the proper exploratory work and then be able to hold full and fair hearings.
Full and fair. Maybe the senator should explain that sentiment to the, Donald Trump calls him the head clown, Senator Chuck Schumer, and his fellow Dems, who reportedly vowed to take a so-called scorched earth approach to, the confirmation process and, in particular, the Supreme Court nominee. Joining me now, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, and have we got a lot for you tonight?
Yes, we do.
Let's start with Dianne Feinstein, basically ignoring what Senator Schumer said, which is he's going to oppose everyone, come hell or high water.
Well, I'm sure the White House was happy to hear her say that, and I'm happy to hear her say that. Amongst the Democrats, She is a rare, conscientious individual, but she will bring some Democrats with her. She met with Judge Gorsuch today.
Right.
And at the end of the meeting, she said he is obviously brilliant and he cares about people. Second part, sending a message to other Democrats, because that was part of Chuck Schumer's argument against them. He doesn't care about people.
And he had a unanimous support in the Senate when confirmed, 10 years ago?
I don't think they put that much effort into scrutinizing circuit court judges. I'm aware of that argument. I think if they knew he was going to go on the Supreme Court, they might have looked at him a little bit differently, because Chuck Schumer would oppose anybody that Donald Trump nominated, unless the person were a Democrat, which is not going to happen.
And a leftist Democrat at that, if there's any other kind. But
yes.
Let's turn to the Ninth Circuit Court, the most overturned, the farthest left-wing court in the land among appellate courts. Are we going to see, as Senator Feinstein would put it, a full, fair hearing, or is this just going to be a stamp and sent to the Supreme Court? You
know, there's a couple of issues here, and before the court even reaches the issue about whether the order by the trial judge staying the effect of the president's executive order was appropriate, and I have argued was absolutely, profoundly inappropriate, that the president followed the law to a T. The issue is, does the state of Washington and does the state of Minnesota have the standing to bring this case? Basic constitutional law says you can't just sue the president because you dislike what he did. You have to have been harmed by what he did. So my question, were I on that panel tomorrow night, would be to the attorney generals of this state: how was your state harmed? There's no individual here who says he couldn't get in the country, who had a surgical procedure scheduled that was blocked by Donald Trump's order. That would be harmful. But how was the state harmed? Because without harm, there is no standing to bring the case. And if there is no standing, the case is over.
What's your projection? What will happen?
My projection is a little different from what you'd expect. I think the Ninth Circuit will invalidate this order for the reason I just articulated. It's a neutral, non-political way to invalidate it. It doesn't take a position on the wisdom of the order. It just says these two litigants don't have the standing to bring the case. It's over. It's back in the president's camp.
You know, and I can't think of a time, and certainly I'm not a student of the law nor its history, but I don't remember a time where a district court judge issued a blanket stay like this that affected every court in the land.
Well, they are rare. Normally, district court judges confine their orders to the geographical area in which they sit. This is the rare one that's trying to interfere with the president's administration of the law in every airport in the United States.
And, Judge, I've got to ask you, what do you think of these folks in the national left-wing media who are clucking because he referred to the judge in Washington as a so-called judge, and that he shouldn't be politicizing our judiciary?
I don't think he was undermining the judiciary at all. A, he was angry, and we both know him. He can get angry when somebody's frustrating him. But B, I think he was basically saying the judge wasn't acting like a judge. He was acting like a politician trying to second-guess me, and that's not his job. That's how I understood the president.
Especially now that we're watching Chuck Schumer make it pretty clear how the politics play in the U.S. Senate as a judge is confirmed for a justice for the Supreme Court.
Chuck Schumer's delays are starting to have an effect. One of the reasons we don't have a chain of command in the Justice Department handling this case, is because we don't have an attorney general, because Schumer is needlessly delaying the inevitable confirmation of Jeff Sessions. Watch him try and do the same thing with Judge Gorsuch, especially if he thinks this issue is going to get to the Supreme Court.
A pox on his house.
Yes.
That's what I say.
I bet the president...
I'm going to have to look up pox.
I bet whatever that means, I bet the president agrees with you.
Judge Andrew Napolitano, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lou.
Good to see you. Joining me now, Washington Examiner chief political correspondent Byron York. Byron, great to have you with us.
Hi, Lou.
I want to start, if I may, with your reaction to the which you wrote about in your column today. This Western Washington District Court judge who decided he knew better than the President of the United States about who and who is not a threat to this country. And you have dug a little deeper, obviously, than the judge. What did you find?
Well, there were a couple of things. One of the key arguments in this case was that the government, the Justice Department, was saying, look, the Constitution and the law give the president the authority to do what he's doing in this order. They don't really give a U.S. District Judge for the Western District of Washington State the authority to do that. And the judge obviously rejected that argument. And one of the things the judge did was he wanted to show the Justice Department that there was really no basis for this Trump order. So he asked the Justice Department lawyer, well, tell me, of these 7 countries, how many people have been arrested in the United States for terror-related offenses? And the Justice Department lawyer didn't know, and the judge said, well, it's 0. Problem is, it's not 0. Since 2001, we've had more than 60 people from these 7 countries arrested and convicted of terror-related offenses.
Yeah, it's stunning. And as you look at those numbers, the hundreds of people who have been, as you point out, charged, convicted, it is really stunning, the level, the number of people coming in. And we know, as a matter of, at least the Islamic State brags that they have insinuated themselves into groups of refugees all across Europe, and particularly southern Europe. And to have a judge who's so extraordinarily arrogant as to sit there and think that he knows more than the President of the United States, this speaks, I think, volumes about what is going on in the national liberal media. There is this view that they can just attack on ideological grounds the President of the United States. I've never seen the likes of it. Have you?
Yeah, there was something else really interesting going on in this case, which is the state of Washington says that it, as a state, will suffer from this executive order because Microsoft is there, Amazon is there, Expedia is there, Starbucks is there, and these companies employ a lot of immigrants. So this order will actually hurt them. So the judge, the Justice Department said, "Look, Judge, if you're going to stop this order, at least just do it here in Washington State." And the judge said, no, it's got to be a national stop. And by the way, that's really kind of a global stop, because we're talking about people in various countries being stopped from coming there to the United States.
Byron, we've got to go, but I just want to ask, did the judge bother to ask, well, how many employees of those fine companies would be affected, as he did in the case of the people who were pursuing terror against us from those 7 nations?
Well, actually, Washington State said in its brief that 5,000 H-1B visa holders work for Microsoft alone right now. So it's a very big deal out there.
But from those 7 countries, I doubt it very seriously.
No, absolutely not at all. Not at all.
Byron, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou.
Great to talk with you, and great, as always, to read your column. Up next, the Republican establishment goes after President Trump for defending Vladimir Putin against accusations that he is a killer. Ed Rollins, Michael Goodwin weigh in on that and much more. Straight ahead, stay with us. We'll be right back. In our online poll, we asked you last Friday evening, are you more or less optimistic about the future of the country after 2 weeks of the Trump presidency? 94% of you say you're more optimistic. Joining me now, veteran of 10 presidential campaigns, Ed Rollins. He won every one of them. And Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Post, Michael Goodwin. Great to have you both here.
Just the early ones, like Lincoln and them.
They all count, right? I want to turn first to this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. An order that on its face looks absolutely reasonable. Nearly everyone is saying, what is the point of what this district court judge did, and what do you think?
Well, I think obviously the law is on the side of the president, but I do think the appeals court, which 2 members voted the other night to hold it up, those same 2 judges are going to be the 2 of the 3 tomorrow.
I hate that when random judges show up together like that.
Both Democrats. They've added 1 Republican.
That's a balance.
Judge Canopy is 85 years old, and he's an expert on American Indian law, which is obviously going to be very important in all of this. And Judge Freeland was born in Berkeley and graduated from Stanford Law, so obviously they're going to pretty much... So I assume
couldn't get back into Berkeley.
When you look at the entire court, there's 18 Democrats and 7 Republicans. So we've been fighting since my days in the Reagan White House to try and get this left court a little bit more balanced, and have failed miserably ever since. So
do you love these people, Michael, who say, oh, the president has absolutely, he's politicizing the judiciary, saying so-called judge, when this court is known as the most left-wing court in the country. You've got Chuck Schumer, as I said earlier, going after, in a scorched earth pursuit, Judge Neil Gorsuch, to deny him a seat, the most qualified, I think arguably the most qualified jurist since certainly Scalia.
Right. And it's probably not well known, Lou, but the way you get to be a federal judge is you get nominated by a senator from your state. So you've got, and as Ed points out, in those 3 states, California, Oregon, and Washington, you've got 6 Democratic senators who are only going to nominate Democrats.
We're awaiting the Communist Party to build its foundations a little bit.
They're not your ordinary Democrats even. Russell Baker, the late, great New York Times columnist, humor columnist from many years ago, once said that, just remember, a judge is just a lawyer who curried favor with a politician. And I think that's what we have here. So this idea that the judges are sacrosanct because they have a robe, I mean, let's grow up.
Yeah, and the entire country, I think, is I think we're actually in the throes of that right now. That's part of the issue. You've got the president of the United States saying that Putin may be a killer, but there are other killers. There are lots of killers around the country. We haven't always been innocent, I think, is what his implication was.
I do think the president has this confidence that he can sit down and negotiate with anybody, and I think that's part of this whole drill here. I do think he's been widely attacked on that particular remark, and I don't think we need to...
He's been widely attacked by people waving the flag and saying all sorts of just, offering up bromides and platitudes and cliches, and, all that's missing is a hallelujah chorus. The fact of the matter is he's right in essence, saying that this country has not always been careful in the way in which we have wielded power. And we have to be, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. He's trying to say, grow up, I think, on one level.
I do think Putin has gone beyond he's killed a few opposition leaders, and I think that's a little different than what we've done in the past.
Well, no. And don't do this Ben Sass moral equivalency crap, because that just isn't what he was saying.
Yes.
What he's saying is a modest and responsible foreign policy means that people don't die. And that is what is at the essence of what he was saying.
Well, look, I'm hoping that what he got doing here is a strategic move to isolate Iran from Russia. I mean, he's been being very tough on Iran, at the same time very, very friendly with Russia. And to the extent that you can isolate Iran, I think is the most important thing. I think the Obama deal with Iran is the worst possible foreign policy mistake you could possibly make. And I think that Trump is right. I think he's right to try to put that deal back in the box.
We've got 30 seconds. Is he right, however, to have had his State Department secretary and his Defense Department secretary basically issue ultimatums, whether it be against China or Iran?
Not unless they're willing to back them up. I think the reality is we saw that with Obama, and I think to a certain extent we don't have a foreign policy yet, and I think that he has to make sure that those people who are out there speaking on behalf of the country have the ability to back it up.
Ed Rollins, Michael Goodwin, always a joy and a pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen. That's it for us tonight. Thanks for being with us. Randy Evans, Matt Slapp, Liz Peek, among our guests tomorrow. Be with us. Good night from New York.